All right, well, thank you everyone for joining our little DIY feminism workshop. So this is DIY feminism, utilizing special collections as spaces for creative activism. Just to let you know, you should have a folder with a zine, and also there's crafting supplies. And just so you know, I'll just give you a heads up, like the workshop or thing that we're doing is everyone like makes like one page of a collage or a zine page, and then we'll scan them later and like put them all together into a digital feed. So, and then if you don't, you can pretty much do a page about anything. You can do a page about anything, but if you need a prompt, there's one in the actual zine, and then there's also on our page, which will we'll give you the link to. But pretty much, yeah, just write about your experiences with DIY, or if you collected, or there's like an example of like kind of the directions for it, and then there's an example like in the very back of like just a simple like scene page, like in the actual theme on top of the folder. And then what else? Feel free to get up and get supplies or look through all the materials while we're talking. Ultimately, we're going to do a presentation for about 20 to 30 minutes. Open it up for discussion, put on some music, and then let you all like do collage for the rest, and then maybe close it up at like 10 till to conclude. So, but yeah, whenever we're done with the presentation, feel free to like talk to each other or ask questions, and we'll have like examples up here too. And yeah, I think that's how should we give them the link? I put in the chat. Okay, so yeah, for here. Yeah. We will provide you with a link as you're leaving, or we can send it out to you all with the digital zine, perhaps. So our Spark page has a number of resources in it, just like reference to resource materials about DIY feminism, a link to our playlist. And then also for folks who are attending virtually, this is like a very hands-on in-person workshop because we're working with scissors and glue and stuff like that. But we also have provided for you, again, links to everyone that everyone will have access to via the Spark page, as well as you do have a little digital clip art folder. So if you do want some additional inspiration either for right now or in the future, you can look to that for some images. But we do invite you, depending on what your afternoon is looking like, if you're already here in this space virtually, to join us virtually and just sort of be in community with us from afar and use this as your own crafting space. And we would love to see if you do create anything. We would love for you to share that with us, that we can also bring together in our final collective. And for virtual attendees, yeah, we have a clip art folder. But if you have crafting stuff at home that you want to do, feel free. There's also like this entire page that we created that has like info and resources on it, so you can follow along with our workshop. But then also, there's also this really cool video from the San Francisco Museum of Art, how to make a zine, a very Bay Area tutorial. And then there's also another Spark page that another organization created called Opening the Feminist Archive that has some other like really interesting, like kind of, can you find the DIY material in these? And then if you're going to listen to the playlist, you might want to make sure you're on mute and listen to it, through your computer. But after we do the actual presentation, we're going to put the playlist on. So it'll just, I think we might stop recording and it'll just be music and people like talking to each other. And if you have a question, we'll be checking the chat. So just type your questions in the chat or any comments and we'll get to those. Yeah. So we have a mixtape. So I'll give you, I guess maybe I can share a little bit of background about, I guess what we should also be to introduce. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm Bernadette Floresca. I'm archivist for collection management and digital preservation at Newcomb Archives at Tulane University in New York. And I put up in kind of archives and special collections at Newcomb Archives and making more hot collection at Newcomb Institute at Tulane in New Orleans. To give you a little bit of background about us, we're a repository that collects on the history of women and gender in the Gulf South. Our history is that we came out of the Women's Coordinate College of Tulane University. We were founded in the late 1980s with a grant that was recognizing that we had not, up to that point, actually been formally preserving all of the records of the college. And so there was a recognition that there was a need to do that. So that included the administrative records, student records, very much institutional records, but then our collecting mission branched out to include the records of our alumni as well as organizations that they were affiliated with, and then more broadly to include collecting just generally along the lines of the history of women and gender in the Gulf South region. So our collections don't necessarily have to have any sort of personal link to Tulane at this stage. And then we also maintain a non-circulating special collection library that came out originally of the Women's Center Library of Tulane University that was founded in 1975. Originally, that was founded as a post-career, or I guess I would say post-bac re-entry into career professionalism resources library. So it was for alumni who had, in most cases, perhaps graduated or gotten married right away out of college, and then perhaps they were either shifting careers or had not entered the workforce, and so then we're looking to enter the workforce later in life. And then that also has now evolved pretty much to complement the collections that we have within our manuscript collecting areas. And it's taken a lot of really, I think, really sort of awesome broad twists and turns, you know, as our collecting mission has evolved. So we now use those resources and build upon that to add to things like our zine collection. We also have a tarot collection. We collect on women in horror. We've also historically always collected on women in culinary history, history of women in education. We also collect prescriptive literature, and that really covers like a very broad range of topics and kind of overlaps with a lot of the things I've talked about. And we're also recently starting to acquire artists' books as well. So very kind of flexible, diverse collecting areas there. Do you want to add anything to that?
Oh no, that's very thorough.
Okay, yeah. So sorry, this is, you all don't have to, or you don't have to be like reading the screen, but this is just to give a breakdown and as a resource to look back on for folks who are joining us virtually or later on. So I'm going to give a little bit of a formal grounding in what DIY feminism is before we get started today. And then I'll probably speak more off the cuff, which is what I usually do anyway. Yeah, about certain aspects that relate to what we do and DIY feminism. So just summarizing from one of the articles that we've shared with you in the reference list from today's presentation. This is from Red to J from 2009. DIY, or do-it-yourself feminism, is an umbrella term that fuses together different types of feminism. It draws on genealogies of punk cultures, grassroots movements, and the technologies of late capitalism. This movement meshes lifestyle politics with counterculture networking. It takes as its focus everyday acts of resistance and power. DIY feminism disrupts complacent beliefs that feminism and social change are no longer on the agenda of young people. Emerging from a so-called post-feminist milieu, DIY feminism constitutes a grassroots, micro-political feminist response to consumer capitalism and state authority. This feminist movement draws on the cultural currency of prefigurative politics, that is, living the change you want to see in the world, and circulates through the affected economies of passion, pleasure, friendships, and community building. As Belgian zine maker Nina Nijden states, DIY feminism is about everyone doing feminism ourselves and making changes, however small that may seem at first sight. It means not waiting for others, for professionals or politicians to make the world more women-friendly and to solve problems related to sexism. DIY feminist actions take many forms, but commonly include producing activist media and films, squatting buildings, creating guerrilla art, holding discussion groups, facilitating workshops, moving politics into music and performance, skill sharing, organizing street demos and protests, creating autonomous zones such as festivals and gatherings, and exploring being as self-sufficient as possible. DIY feminists tend not to agitate on a broad community scale on a plethora of issues. Instead, they mobilize through countercultures and networks enmeshed in queer sexualities and gender expressions that are maintained through the politics of style and transported through new medias and technologies. And I know that's a mouthful, but I just thought there's just no way to say this better. It all just This is so good. But just some aspects to keep in mind as defining characteristics of what we might identify as DIY feminist activism. One is that there are no experts. So DIY feminism relies on the concept that self and community empowerment is important, and that our political actions in feminism can be informed by our own lived experiences. And part of that is being able to have a media of one's own. And so often that means relying on what you might refer to as the tools of capitalism and appropriating these. So things that we have very easy access to, like computers, cell phones, and of course photocopiers, which very much play into the history of zine distribution and zine making. And zines, for anyone in the room not familiar, or anyone not in the room not familiar, are small-scale magazines or pamphlets that are written, designed, illustrated, published, and distributed by their makers on a non-commercial basis. That's like sort of just the most broad definition. There are some finer points that I think there's like some debate on whether or not they have to always be applied or not applied to what defines a zine, but I think that that definition kind of fits a lot of them in there. And frequently these deploy low finance, aesthetic, and cheap printing methods. So back in the day, definitely relying much on photocopiers, and now on a lot of digital resources that we all typically do have at our fingertips. It also involves, in terms of identifying DIY feminism, working on the fringes of institutions and mainstream political groups, organizations, and government. Also creating alternative spaces. So this is kind of important, both thinking about this in the sense of a physical gathering, but also thinking about transnational collective building via different modes of communication technology. So that could be joining us all now together here via Zoom, but that could also be, thinking back around the earlier days of zine distribution and actually, recycling stamps and sending zines to people using zine distro lists for addresses. And staying in communication with folks who maybe aren't necessarily in your immediate circle, but who are sharing your identity politics as well. And that's something I think that's really significant to think about in contemporary context, how just like our level of connectivity that we have nowadays creates so many spaces for people that perhaps were so much harder to access previously. And now there's so many spaces for collective community building in online spheres. And then as well as that, just thinking about solidarity and networking also is being really important. And so that can take the form of establishing friendships and also exchanges and believing that social change can happen through small and linked up actions. And then I'll let you talk sort of about definitions of some of the items that we consider as DIY feminist media.
Yeah, so of course, like the most popular one are zines. And this is, like Chloe said, small circulation, self-published, can be published by either an individual or a group. And that's just kind of a general like definition of that, which I don't think I'm gonna read like these like word for word, but if you have questions or if you want to look at the definition, you can definitely scroll through this whenever over time, or you can ask questions. But also, art installations, flux happenings, and performance art, and just because flux is a weird concept, that is artworks that are created through actions performed by the artist or the participants, which may be live or recorded, spontaneous, or scripted. So this might be a flux. Artist books, of course, which that's a medium of artistic expression that uses the form or function of book as inspiration. And many zines are artist books, but not all artist books are zines. And also craftwork, knitting, circles, quilting, any applied form of art, a social and cultural product reflecting the inclusive nature of both imagination. And I guess handiwork, where useful and decorative objects are made completely by hand or by using only simple tools. Tarot and oracle decks, and Chloe wrote this really great article called, what was it called? Divination, tarot decks in the ivory tower, which is, if you read tarot, reference to one of the major arcana cards. But I'll actually read this because I think a lot of folks are always like, and we're also Reddit famous, by the way.
Oh, yes, yeah, I got some controversy on Reddit.
Yeah. So, because, well, anyway, we'll provide that Reddit link. But yeah, I'll go ahead and read this because I think a lot of times when I tell people that we collect tarot, they're just like, why? What does it have to do with like archives and feminists, collections, and then also like, how have you been like collection developed with that? How do you choose, well, it's really easy if you're an archivist. The other folks like don't know, but anyway, tarot and other esoteric traditions have been historically intertwined with second and third wave feminism. From Mother Peace Tarot deck created in 1978 and endorsed by Alice Walker and Clarissa Pinkola Estes, exploration of feminine archetypes and mythologies, to the teen witch phenomenon epitomized by late 90s pop culture, film, and television classics like The Craft and Charmed. With consideration for their place in archives and special collections, tarot decks are similar to zines in that they capture the unique perspective of their creators through a combination of art and text. Likewise, they're often self-published with limited circulation and extremely limited print runs. And a lot of our tarot decks are like limited print editions. So yeah, of course, obviously signs and flyers and posters. Collage, of course, so zine and collages are big, this workshop is brought to you by Zines and Collage today. And if you don't know what a collage is, since we're going to be working on that, it's a technique of art creating primarily using visual arts, but you can also do it in music too by sampling. But it's pretty much a work that results from the assemblage of different forms, and so you create a whole new composition when you cut and paste, draw, and you like kind of aggregate these papery things and groups. Also websites and blogs, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, I really followed this when I was a young adult. DIY zinesters began utilizing websites as sites for DIY content. And some examples include, and you can't really find them anymore, even on the Wayback Machine, but some examples include cutandpaste.net, which doesn't exist anymore, and Church of Craft, which does, but they don't. You can only tell that it's Church of Craft from like early 2000s if you look at their archives. But then there's other ones like Lechner.com was a good one. And way back, you can see some of these, but oftentimes they weren't, they were, I guess, crawled like, or captured after they had already been taken down, or someone had already like acquired their, what is that called? Domain. Also, another popular one, lo-fi band and DIY music demos. So a lot of times, like if you had a zine back in the 90s, it probably also had like a band ad in it, or you could order like, they're very lo-fi like demo tape, or even like singles. And in my opinion, homemade like music production was really easy back before all the computery stuff. And then of course, mixtape CDs and sound collages. Today we might make someone an audio compilation via Spotify like we did for this workshop. But I'm sure we all know that back in the day, like you gave like your very best friend or a boy you liked or a girl you liked, like a tape you made with a theme. And then, of course, like CDs, burning them onto CDs. And, you get bonus points if the person who gave it to you created like a collage or like a DIY like cover for it. Also comics, underground and handmade comics, this people use zine format to like distribute and self-publish for these. And then also a lot of like, zines had like little comics and that people would submit. And then like my first one was like Action Girl comics. And then of course, handmade button stickers and other swag. So any of that material that's DIY that goes with communities that are trying to like create culture. So all communities have their swag and D.I.Y homemade ones created by community members inclusively represent culture more so than commercial standardized digital branding that we see today. Which, you know, I guess that's my opinion, but I mean, I really feel like this is a lot more like D.I.Y and community centric than like, you know, the university's like logo is, I guess, my point. And then I put etc. here because today any medium can be considered D.I.Y or lo-fi feminism, depending on its intended audience and functions. The analog formatted examples in the list that I have may still be created today, but may be more digital as we see a decline in practical communication utilization of physical print materials. I mean, even the junk mail today is like not as cool as it used to be. I really miss the finger cut catalogs my mom used to get. And formats of production are, you know, ephemeral and will probably change with consumer culture and technology. One aspect of digital art that's really problematic and beneficial is that digital files content can be somewhat permanent via copying and sharing, but can also be ephemeral depending on its visibility based on how popular it is. So like those D.I.Y blogs and craft websites, like they weren't mainstream, so nobody like saved them, so they're gone. You know, so it's easier for things that are super popular and mainstream to get like become permanent digitally, if that makes sense. And then I'll hand it over to Chloe.
Try to wrap up a little bit the talking portion. Yeah, so some examples from our collections. And so again, you know, people might ask why collect these materials. For us, that answer is quite obvious because our focus is on history of gender and women and very much on the history of feminist movements, local feminist movements. And so you know, it fits very well with our collecting mission. But I think that's going to be true for, you know, I think anywhere that is collecting, particularly along the lines of trying to document any sort of social justice or, you know, non-mainstream movements as well. You're going to see a lot of media that falls under this kind of D.I.Y cultural media. And so for us, we, you know, tend to collect under the umbrella of feminism. Some examples we're just sharing here today. We have an entire zine collection, but we also have manuscript collections that focus entirely on zines. We have some that are from others intentional zine collections. We have the collection of a person who was writing their MA thesis on the Riot Girl movement and had collected all of these original zines and then created copies of them and donated copies of their zines to us. So we have that as an independent collection. We also have zines that were made by students. These images here are examples of ones that came from what was called the Newcomb Arcade zine, which was actually a reference to the college publication of Newcomb College that was published in 1909 to 32. Yeah, that's what I said there. 1909 to 1932. So the title there was a reference, which was actually a reference to one of the campus buildings as well. And it's very collage-based media. We have some examples too that kind of fall under our realm. We have a lot of materials that document history of activism against sexual violence and taking action against sexual violence and rape. So publications that are locally distributed, these are from the 70s, and then from the 1980s, the first Take Back the Night march that was held in New Orleans. So these are images of people with their signs as well. And then, so one thing that I think kind of brought a lot of other archives into this collecting of this type of material was actually the women's marches of 2017 and then subsequently, which was interesting to me because as somebody who manages an archive where we've historically been collecting lots of things like, you know, lots of, you know, movement signs, homemade bumper stickers, buttons. One thing to note is that this is a lot of this is media that comes with inherent bias, as we like to say in archives. There's lots of glue, there's like sticky things, stuff that attracts bugs, stuff that was not meant to last. Like it is really ephemeral in nature. And it's kind of trying to draw, you know, find what is the right line between preservation and between where is, you know, is this potentially damaging to our other materials, space-wise, can we actually accommodate it? And so when it felt like all these, you know, archives who maybe previously had not collected protest signs were like, yes, like give us your signs. I was a little bit like, we have so many signs, and I know how challenging it is to collect them. So I was actually like a little bit more cautious going into that, just knowing what some of those challenges are. We had other area repositories who I think were like feeling that energy and were like signs. And so I was like, you know what, I don't really feel like competing, in this realm. Like, we are always documenting feminism and documenting women's movements. What we focused on actually was then just digital collecting. So we actually have an almost entirely, it's like 99% foreign digital collection documenting the women's marches of DC and in New Orleans as well. Because we had a number of folks just either in our network who had gone up to DC, and then we also, the Institute, sponsored a bus of students to go to Washington, DC. We also did some digital oral histories with them as well, and then we asked for them to donate photos if they wanted to. So we do have like a couple physical signs and one pink hat, but mostly this is digital collection. But you can see a lot of the different signage of other participants who were at the march as well. And then, of course, we mentioned our tarot collection, and these are some tarot decks actually that make use of the collage medium that are really beautiful. There are links out to the creators' sites. And then, of course, our zine collection. So yeah, we also have, other ephemera that I didn't put up here. Like I said, we do bumper stickers. We collected a lot of material documenting the movement to codify the Equal Rights Amendment in Louisiana. That was ultimately unsuccessful. But we have lots of, buttons, bumper stickers, t-shirts, homemade t-shirts from that era as well. So yeah, really a lot of media. And again, like I said, some of it can be challenging to preserve. And so it is kind of trying to strike that balance of, how much of it do we have a good representation? Are we getting to the point where maybe this just has sort of like ephemeral and textural appeal, but it doesn't have a lot of intellectual content, or there's a way that intellectual content could be gained through another means, and so perhaps we don't prioritize collecting it, or do we prioritize collecting it because like there is still going to be that benefit to having that tactile and physical experience with this. So that's just something we're kind of always straddling when we are collecting materials. And then, this is just this beautiful little collage that Bernadette made, but popular supplies. And we have a number of supplies laid out in the back for you. And we don't have a typewriter here, that would be cool, or a Xerox machine. But this kind of leads well into, so talking about what are some, so we've talked about utilizing special collections. So this workshop is supposed to also give you a taste of a little bit more than just collecting DIY feminist materials, but also how can your spaces be a place for DIY feminist community, and DIY feminist making and learning. So we have done a couple sessions, usually under what we have termed our Crafternoon brand. And so this is where we've invited people into our spaces to kind of use our space and our materials, not actually use, so they're not cutting or gluing our, actual manuscript or special print materials collections, but to use those as inspiration for creating. And then we provide them, as we are doing here today, with materials and resources and all the crafting supplies that to actually make their own materials, and then giving them the option to either donate those materials or donate a digital surrogate of those materials to us. Then we facilitate that donation of scanning and putting it in our repository. And so this is an image from, we do through our institute, we do a pre-college summer program for high school students. We teach classes on a number of topics. So these were students who were taking a feminist media course, and we were in the week where the imminent and inevitable Dobbs v. Jackson decision was coming out, and everybody knew this, and there was a lot of weight hanging on us at this time. And so we opened up our space to have folks create postcards as part of the AIR Gallery's annual postcard show, which is all themed around my body, my choice. So this is an annual show where AIR Gallery, which is the oldest female exhibiting art gallery in New York City, solicits postcard donations from anyone and then displays them. And so we had high school students making these My Body, My Choice postcards at this very potent time. And then we did actually mail the originals to AIR, and then we have digital copies of them as well. So it's just an example of what some of these look like. And yeah, it was just like it was a really nice way to like have some of these younger people decompress, and also like this sort of speaks to one of the things that is so great about DIY feminism is that it gives people this opportunity for a political action that's very like low barrier of entry. So, you know, anyone can draw or collage or craft and be together and talk about ideas. And there isn't this sense of like, you have to have these degrees or this job or this amount of money to donate to this campaign. You know, so I think that really is a lot of what we were trying to get at here. And we are actually going to be, so in addition to hosting just spontaneous craft afternoons, we also do a tarot and oracle salon every year around Halloween time, which opens up use of our decks for folks to come in, and we give people examples of how they can do readings for each other, between each other. And then we also provide crafting supplies and invite them to use this as inspiration too, to make DIY feminist media. And then this summer, we're going to be piloting for the first time a class that is just going to focus on DIY feminism for pre-college high school students, where we're going to be kind of taking all the stuff we're talking about in this workshop. We're going to have a whole week to like take folks around to tour other archives that are collecting materials like this. And so like watch movies and have invited speakers come in, and it's going to be really awesome. So yeah, so it's kind of tying it all together. So we both care about collecting DIY feminist materials, but we also care about like the flip side of making our reading room, you know, this welcoming public space where we feel like not only can people research and see evidence of this type of material, but they can also see themselves as creators and makers of material that can be archival and that falls under this realm of DIY feminism.
Also a space that isn't being surveilled too.
Yes.
So that's like one really awesome thing about, you know, doing kind of analog zines, is that, you know, it's not digital, like you can have like a community that's not like that, you know, you can choose if you want it to be exploited by digitizing it.
Yeah, and I think, and yeah, I'll just sort of like, yeah, concluding a little bit on that point. Yeah, for example, I mean, we have, I don't know if I have, maybe you have copies of it here, but like I made a zine that is about all of the resources in our collection that relate to reproductive justice and abortion rights and history. You know, we are at an institution based in Louisiana. Like we were told like via our university that like our communications via the dog's decision, like, you know, had to take into consideration like postpartum sort of like, you know, yeah. So so I think for us, it's sort of seeing this also as a way where it's like, you know, we want people to be able to be in community and express what they are thinking and feeling, but maybe not necessarily, you know, have those be able to feel like perhaps this is something that can just be ephemeral if you don't want to donate it or distribute it or have it, you know, it is there's a way for you to contribute and put information out there, but in a way that perhaps doesn't, you know, carry some of the same burdens of surveillance that I think a lot of folks are sensitive to nowadays.
But also, you know, well, for zines particularly, like zines have become like a really great platform that we've been using to like, you know, do like bibliographies, and also like during, you know, for anytime we do presentations, like, you know, we try to make a zine. And in the past, we've done presentations where like we didn't have tech. So we would try to make a zine that kind of mimicked like what our PowerPoints would be and have those for folks. But for students and people using the collection, like, you know, zines, and sometimes, you know, like synthesizing information in a more creative way kind of is like, you know, it's just more refreshing than like the, you know, the research paper, you know? So that's kind of another way that I feel like a lot of the summer session and students are using zines is like a format to like, you know, have a group collaboration, because sometimes, you know, thinking about making an entire zine might be overwhelming. So, you know, you can do it to where like, you know, 2 or 3 students do 1 or 2 pages, or, you know, one or 2 or 3 students make one zine, you know, so you can, this is like, I think this is a better way to collaborate than like breakout rooms or like, you know, but yeah.
We have a resource list in our Spark page. So we have some books. We're gonna, when we set up for, we're gonna be all handed over for just the crafting in just a sec. But we have some books up here you're welcome to come and check out, and also some zines from our collections too that just like are on all sorts of different DIY topics. So please feel free to come and check those out. And in our reference list that we linked here too, there's a bibliography of all of those resources. I think here, does anyone want to, should we open up for like any questions right now or do that?
Let's see if any of our virtual folks have questions right now.
I think there was one in the chat there.
Okay. I have so, and please, if anyone else joining us virtually has questions, feel free to throw them in. So I will read to y'all just a couple of questions. Are you all part of the Zine Librarians Collective? I can answer that we are not, but we are familiar with their work. And actually have used some of their guidance as well for our tarot ethics around our tarot collecting as well, because it's translates very well between zine and tarot. We'll be posting the resulting zine. Yes, we will figure out how to make that a possible.
Depending on if, who wants to share.
Who wants to share their email address? Have you all define the differences between zine versus magazine? We kind of covered that. I'm currently working on local DIY subcultural materials that include non-zine elements, like ads for local businesses to cover printing costs. Yeah, I mean, I would say probably just the distinguishing characteristics would probably be number, print run, and sort of print, like not, I think there can be like fringe affiliations too with more like larger commercial entities, but I think it's that kind of independent cultural production. So not sort of having that big centralized backing as well for distribution.
Yeah, and a good example is like, you know, a lot of like young zinesters love Sassy Magazine, but Sassy Magazine was not a zine. It was like a mass produced, you know, magazine for like kind of young alternative individuals. So,
Yeah.
but however, we loved it so much that a lot of times like we would format our zines to kind of make fun of, or, you know, really specialize on our personal interests in a magazine format.
And magazines great too. We actually also collect like feminist magazines as well, and have like there are some really beautiful ones that are coming out right now that again are like very small scale independent magazine production, but you know, it's like they're soliciting articles, hopefully they're paying their contributors a little bit more of a polished production. But for a lot of those too, they actually end up similarly being like very low run, like very ephemeral in that they might only be able to get, you know, a few quarterly issues out and then you know, have to call it or go entirely online. And so it's nice if you can get that physical copy when it's yeah. Do we have any other questions now? Please. Yes.
Am I going first? Okay. I mostly had a question. You had a photograph of like your zine library. Is that just like open in your stacks in your research room? So people can just browse them?
Yes, and that was
Okay.
actually an old picture because I'm lazy and didn't feel like taking a new picture. I had that one on hand.
We have more than like 30.
Yeah, but so they're like our stacks from like our old buildings like 5 years ago. But yeah, no, we do. That is one of so we don't have room in our reading room to have all of our collections there. So we do keep a number of them in our offsite storage space where we have our manuscript collections. But we do have all of our zines. So we prioritize some collections, keeping them on site, and zines are one of them.
Have you had any issues with like theft or anything with them just kind of being in that impossible stacks?
No one wants to steal zines. Only I would.
Yeah, not
It's just, it's good to know because we just recently started a zine collection and I like tried to really push that it was out there and even like did some stuff about how to use a finding aid that I made in a zine and put in a zine box, and like no one's accessed the zines. So I kind of wonder if just putting them out would be a better idea.
Well, and we have like a magnetic strip,
Yeah.
so which never goes off unless we actually steal them because we're having to take them on conference.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we've taken like just to say like a little bit about our space, we're open for walk-ins. It's dictated by our staff hours. We are the only 2 full-time staff members at our space, so we just can't provide that for the greatest level of accessibility, but we're open to walk-ins 10 to 4 Monday through Thursday, and that primarily is for quiet study use. We do say because our collections are stored offsite, we do say, you know, sometimes we can accommodate same day, but we would like ideally between 24 to 72 hours, since we also have weather in New Orleans. So there are some days where we literally cannot hold collections. Yeah, so that space is open, and we kind of just said, there are cameras outside of our reading room because there is a exhibit space that has Newcomb pottery, which some folks might be familiar with Newcomb pottery. It's the arts and crafts movement that came out of the original Newcomb College. That's quite valuable. So there's a camera out there that's focused on that area. We don't have cameras in our reading room, and we really just kind of treated this as like, when we have a problem, that's when we'll start thinking about this, but we have kind of decided to enter this is a newish space that we moved into. We moved into it in 2019, and we decided to say, we're just going to take a good faith ethics on this and have collection materials here and trust that our users kind of know what we're about and know what we're collecting, and hopefully in the spirit of that would not be the type of people who would also steal those materials. And thus far that has worked for us. I know certainly that like stuff does happen. And so it's a possibility, but we just decided to sort of say that up till that point. We also do, we do a lot of classes with our zines. We work with a lot of folks in the gender and sexuality studies department, but also other departments across campus. So that's been a really good way to get knowledge of the zines out to our students, and also to meet some of our students who are making zines and bring their zines into our collection if they want to do that with us. So that's been very helpful. There's a lot of folks in the guest department who are like very excited to do a zine day or a tarot day with their classes.
Thank you.
Is this the mic for questions? That was the Zoom.
Is there a phone for?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
okay. I actually got this because I'm sorry. I don't think it's. All
right, so I had two questions, so I'll just ask them both, and then that way you can have my back. One is, you mentioned having items from the collection as inspiration. Do you make reproductions, like photocopies of items that are in your collection for people to incorporate? And then the second is for when people have donate, or if you scan, do they do it like anonymously, or does every person have a donation form?
Well, first of all, for examples, like a lot of times we'll have examples so students can see, or it doesn't have to be students all the time. It could be a researcher who wants to use zines as inspiration, but you can bring them out, and technically, I guess you could, if like I bought this and I Xerox copied it, like I could cut this up and put it into a zine, because there's actually collage workshops where you work off of other collages that have been made. But in our collection, we don't really do that. We kind of have them as examples of like different ways people have been sharing information in this format. And then like even the one that we did Xerox copy is in every one of your folders, and that's how to make a tiny zine. And if you look on the back, it says it's free to be copied and distributed. So we kind of use like creators' wishes as to how they want their creation to be used.
Yeah, and I'll just add to like with themes, it depends on the zine, because a lot of zines will indicate I want you to photocopy this, and that's how it will get distributed. Some may not. And then generally speaking about our like materials in our archives in terms of like making facsimiles that people could use, that also depends. So we provided this little digital clip art folder for folks today. All of that is stuff that's public domain or that we have the rights to. So if it was not, we would not provide it. And then we also do have some collections where we actually have created our own ethical use statements for our users, and we abide by that when we would think about this kind of context, where for some of them, we don't want people using any imagery or text out of context. And just like an example of that, it's like having like these like second wave women's movement, like and lesbian rights movements, like of New Orleans, Louisiana, like the creators having concerns like, what if somebody was to take this and then like use it for this totally like right-wing purpose? And so we want, a lot of the times the creators, many of our donors are living still. We're a more contemporary collection. As we were founded in the 1980s, our collections do span, on either side of the century, but very much like start middle 20th century up to present. And so a lot of our donors are still living, and they do still have living wishes around, not wanting to see the intent of their work, mutilated in any way. So we do want to be respectful of that. So for many of our collections, we do also take that into consideration as well. And the second part of the question that I now donor forms, that again also depends on anonymity. It depends on the donor, so they can have that option as well.
But yeah, I feel like a lot of times folks will just drop off their zine, you know, especially like students, you know, people will drop off zines and that's fine, but then sometimes folks want like a formal like deed of gift or donation form, you know, I think for this, I don't know, we could create like a waiver or something or a donation form if that's needed.
Just got a really cool donation of like mini zines that were the NOLA roller derby team. Like various members of them made them and handed them out during the Mardi Gras parades that they were rolling with. And then they gave us copies of them. So, and that was like a connection just made from like having one of their members came on a tour and was like, oh wait, you all just made, I like 15 like mini zines. And yeah, so just, you know, spontaneous connections that get made.
Yeah, and I don't think we have any virtual chat or virtual questions right now, but if virtual attendees have them, just kind of put them in the chat and we'll like kind of get back to those whenever before we like conclude. But yeah, we'll just open it up for people to like start collaging if you want to. I did make this zine so that you could just see like a very quick thing. It doesn't really reflect our page, but it has like most of like, you know, the little points in there. And then there's also let's make a collaborative zine. So it has like kind of the instructions on like what we're doing for, you know, it's just like one page. So like, you know, a regular letter size piece of paper is going to be 8.5 by 11. So I have like paper in the folder that's that proportion. But if, you know, that's too big and you just want to make one small thing, you can always fold it in half and it's smaller. But another really great thing is the tiny zine, which I realized I had mentioned it in here, but then didn't really finish my sentence. But yeah, the tiny zine in there is really awesome. And even my partner uses it in his art classes as kind of makeshift sketchbooks, because they can fold them up and then have like 4 or 8 thumbnails that they can just easily use. So the little tiny zines are really awesome. And if you need, if you want me to show you how to fold them, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, I guess we'll put the music on and let you all create.